So on to today's show. Obviously, the big story of the week, of the year, is the return of the Bibas children, the dead, the murdered children, and their mother, Shiri, eventually.
So Keffiyeh for 9 months, Ariel 4 years, and their mother, Shiri. Just extraordinary. And I don't think I've cried as much for people I never met in my life. And I can't imagine many of you felt exactly the same thing.
Hello, I'm Phelim McAleer.
And I'm Anne McElhenney, and welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop.
Yes, it's the Anne and Phelim Scoop. First of all, I have a special announcement to make.
Oh, God, this is making me nervous. But could be good, though.
I am going to announce that I am actually expecting Elon Musk's 14th child.
Okay.
We met over Twitter, X, and I just wanted Elon to know that if he gives me a Cybertruck, there will be no more demands for child support, nothing. It'll be like it never happened, Elon. It'll be like, it'll be just something
Ships passing in the night.
Yes, you've probably forgotten about it already, but I am expecting your child, and a Cybertruck would.
Yeah. And we would actually customize the Cybertruck too, actually, yeah. Because we were looking at different Cybertrucks and thinking, definitely, if we ever could manage to get one, we would definitely
get one.
Customize
Even though it goes against our electric vehicle policy of never having one.
It does go against our policy.
So we're seeing a lot of new faces, a lot of new people are coming to our podcast. The audience numbers are growing. So we just thought a lot of you probably came through our Grooming Gangs film that we released a few weeks ago. So we just wanted to reintroduce ourselves to anyone who's new.
I'm Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
We're married.
Yes.
We're Irish journalists. We divide our time, not really, but we say that we divide our time between the west coast of the United States and the west coast of Ireland.
Yes.
Because we've always wanted to be able to say that we divide our time. At least one of us has always wanted to say, because he read that in a book one time and then he was like struck by that particular phrase and thought, wouldn't it be great if he could say about himself that he divided his time at one point in his life? So he slightly, when he grows up, he wants to divide his time. We kind of slightly divide our time.
So we do podcasts, we do movies, we do plays. For example, we did the Ferguson play. We specialise in verbatim plays, verbatim
and we
material.
specialise in stories that the mainstream media have decided either not to report on or misreport or underreport.
For example, like the Grooming Gangs, like Ferguson, where we used the grand jury testimony to tell the truth about what happened. 9 of the actors walked out during rehearsal because they couldn't handle the truth. We did a Gosnell movie about Kermit Gosnell, the abortion doctor. We did a book, a New York Times best-selling book. We did a podcast also. We told the truth about the Kevin Spacey story. He's innocent.
Which is exactly more surprising than you might think. And even more surprisingly, we attended every day of the trial of Harvey Weinstein in New York. And if you know everything about Harvey Weinstein and that Harvey Weinstein case, you don't, and you ought to listen to. Because surprisingly, we think that Harvey Weinstein should not be in prison.
And the New York Appeals Court agreed with us. Eventually, they caught up. So the Kevin Spacey trial unfiltered, Harvey Weinstein trial unfiltered. Climate Change on Trial was another great thing we did. So those are all podcasts. Look,
we'll put the links in the show notes for people who want to dip in and check out some of the other stuff that we've done. So
that's what we've done in the past. What's on the show today in the future, Anne? See the way I segued there. So anyway, look, we've got obviously the saddest news of the week. In fact, of the year.
In memory, basically, is the story of the Bibas babies, which I think has been on everyone's minds and hearts, and it's just beyond belief what Yarden Bibas, the father, has had to endure. His, being captive for all this time, gets out of manages to get out of captivity to find this extraordinary news about his 2 babies and his wife.
Yeah. And
we all watched it in real time.
And how does we're going to look at how the Irish National Theatre reacted to the murder of the Bibas children and the return of the bodies. Well, as you may know, they refused to let Jewish voices inside their 4 walls, and they decided to spend the week celebrating a Palestinian poet talking about struggle and war. And boy, do they look happy. And also, last week we went 2 by 2 to the ARC conference in London. Sorry, 2 by 2 to the ARC. No, not that ARC.
No, ARC. So the
it's also not.
It's also is ARC spelled with a K?
Yes, it is.
Yes, Phelim, I would have thought that. Yes. So we went to the ARC conference, which is the what's the first A?
Alliance.
Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, which is
Yes.
this extraordinary conference in London, which we will bring you some highlights
Yes.
of what happened when we were
Yes.
there.
And we're going to give you the real story about the fake Children in Gaza documentary. The BBC are shocked, I tell you, that it was fake, but it was fake from the start. All journalism, actually, in some respects, is fake from Gaza. We're going to tell you why. And I don't mean that almost as an insult. It's a fact of life. We're going to tell you how journalism operates from Gaza and how you can overcome that by honesty and transparency, which the BBC didn't do.
And we have a story from the New York Times who have finally decided to tell us something nasty about Planned Parenthood. But the really interesting bit about this story, the massive feature in the New York Times of the last few days, is that they miss out on the most important story of all, which they slightly mentioned in the last paragraph. But anyway, we'll come to that.
And we are going to ask, are we witnessing the death of Irish America? And is it not a moment too soon? So we'll be tending the wake of Irish America soon. So on to today's show. Obviously, the big story of the week, of the year, is the return of the Bibas children, the murdered children, and their mother, Shiri, eventually.
So Keffiyeh for 9 months, Ariel 4 years, and their mother, Shiri. Just extraordinary. And I don't think I've cried as much for people I never met in my life. And I can't imagine many of you felt exactly the same thing. But they made this massive spectacle of bringing the bodies back. I mean, it was just extraordinary.
It was like children there. I was like, Muslim, bring your children to work day. Really awful. No evidence of starving Palestinians. Lots of iPhones.
Yeah, no one was mentioning that. Because we've been hearing all about these starving people. We've been hearing an enormous amount of that. And the very opposite is what we saw. It was this carnival atmosphere. These children, very nicely dressed children, by the way. All of them looked really, really well dressed. None of them looked hungry. And a lot of them seemed to have iPhones.
Charged iPhones. And I thought, remember, the thing that got us to Israel was they're turning off the electricity in Gaza.
Yes.
That was the big story. So...
an insult upon insult. They originally said that they had the body of the mother, Shiri, and she was one of the coffins. And of course, then it turned out it wasn't her at all. It was some random Palestinian woman who we don't know anything about. And instead, just extraordinary, the callousness, but the jumping around and the cheering and music playing while these little toddlers' bodies are in boxes. It's really beyond.
And then it emerged how the babies died.
And it emerged how the babies died.
They strangled them. Sorry.
And then they tried to make it look like they had died in a different way, and so they
mutilated the bodies.
They mutilated the bodies. But at the end of the podcast, we're not going to do it now. There is an amazing article by Bernard Henry Levy in the Wall Street Journal about the babies, and as he said, the tendency is that people want to look away. People really do want to look away from this.
Of course.
But he said we owe it to them to look and to know everything about them. So I'm going to actually, just for the sake of people who feel like they wouldn't be able for it, I'm going to read the full article at the end of the podcast because I think there's certain people, and I know I've sent the article to a number of friends, and I know that people have said, I wouldn't be able to read that. So I'll put it at the very end of the piece.
So this is obviously particularly relevant to us because we created the October 7th play, which is Jewish Voices. We went to Israel after October 7th in November and interviewed about 20 people, boiled their stories down to 14 different stories, some of them connected, some of them not. We created the play October 7th. It ran off Broadway for 6 weeks. Then we had stage readings in Princeton and UCLA. UCLA, they needed bomb-sniffing dogs. They needed
100 cops.
Hundreds of police officers.
Helicopters. It was like a war zone.
We thought, given Ireland is now known as the most anti-Semitic country in Europe, that this play should be performed in Ireland, that people need the truth in Ireland. They need it everywhere. So we applied to the Abbey Theater. I think we talked about this last week, and I just wanted to go over for the new people.
And there's a development.
Yes, and we applied to the Abbey Theater for a private rental, and this is important. It's a private rental. This is a organisation that gets 80 to 90% of its funding from the taxpayer. But we applied for a private rental. We're not asking the Abbey to put on our play, even though they should. They should have been on the phone when they saw the media coverage. We were in the New York Post, we were in the Daily Mail, we were in, we were in all these mainstream outlets.
The Jerusalem Post, by the way,
Yes.
a half page, I think, in the
Yes.
Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel.
Yes.
It was a massive story. And actually, before we go on, I think it's worth-
Allgemeine, we're in German newspapers. We're in international, not just Israeli newspapers or Jewish. This became an international news
But
story.
before we go on, let's just show a clip from the October 7th play to give you an idea of the power of these verbatim testimonies of people who lived through the worst day of their lives.
Lolly helped me navigate.
Okay, turn right. No, don't go over there. There's birds flying from the trees. They're shooting people over there. Okay, go between there. Take a left here. Go.
There were 3 of us in the car. My friend Gilad was in the back. Lolly, my girlfriend, God, she was so calm. She was in the front with me, and I'm driving. These Hamas vehicles, they're barreling right towards us, guns and everything. Lolly was hiding. And this one guy on a motorcycle, this terrorist, he was so close. I was staring him right in the eyes, and him back at me. And I nod to him like we know each other, like we're together. And he nods back at me, like you're okay. And then he sees my girlfriend, he starts shouting in Arabic, shoot the Jews, kill, kill the Jews, slaughter the Jews. I take a big left. 1 bullet hits the back door. Gilad starts yelling.
Fuck, I got shot in the head.
Don't worry, I'll get us out of here. My girlfriend starts to pray.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
The guy on the motorcycle, he tries to shoot again, so I swerve into him. He flies off of his bike 2 meters into the air, into the fields. And then another. So I just turn into him, I just catch him with the back of my car, and he flies off. I swear, if I had had a camera attached to the car, I could have sold the footage to Spielberg himself. I did what I did, my girlfriend said the prayer, and then I did what I did. It's not even about the prayer, it's about what I had to do.
So as you can see, very powerful. So we wrote to the Abbey, private hire, that it would be a private event for people of Ireland to learn the truth. They wrote back to us, and it's Laura O'Shea, who's the events coordinator. Hi, Phelim, comma.
Thank you for your continued interest. However, for the future of all co-productions and presentations on the Abbey stage are at the initiation of the artistic director. Remember that name, because that's going to be important. Unfortunately, this does not fit the remit of our programming aims and ambitions. But thank you very much for sending on the details. Regards, Laura O'Shea, events coordinator.
And so I just want to say something here about this. However, for the future, by the way, really bad grammar. Thank you for your continued interest, comma. That should be a full stop, right? Then it should be, however, for the future. Then it should be, comma, right away. But anyway, she goes, thank you for your continued interest, comma. However, for the future, comma, then putting in the comma here. All co-productions and presentations on the Abbey stages are at the initiations of the artistic director. This is not a presentation on the Abbey stage. This is not a co-production. This is a private hire for an event. If we were launching a book,
yeah,
it's the same as launching a book. It's the same as having a corporate training day.
Yes.
Maybe we should call it corporate training for Hamas. So,
but what's interesting, I think, and it's almost worthwhile going on the Abbey website to see how they describe themselves and how lofty and how impressive and virtue signalling they are about the work that they do. And I just thought it was really incredible because now that they have talked about their programming aims and ambitions, I thought it'd be good to go and see what their mission statement is. What is the mission of the Abbey Theater? And this is what it is. And I'm putting it up there on the screen. Our mission is to effectively and imaginatively engage with all, I'll say it again, all of Irish society. Apparently, there's Jewish people living in Ireland, by the way, Phelim.
Would you call them part of Irish society?
I would think that they were.
People can see your face.
I would think that they are part of Irish society.
I would think so too.
All of Irish society through the production of ambitious, courageous theatre in all its forms. Isn't that interesting? The Abbey Theatre is an artist-led and audience-focused. We seek to ensure our programmes are driven by ambitious, big ideas by theatre makers of all disciplines and relevant to our times and reflective of our role as Ireland's national theatre. If we don't fit that remit, by the way, I mean,
I think that might fit their remit.
I really need that to be. I
aims.
really need this to be broken down for me by them, and we would really welcome to hear back from the Abbey Theatre. By the way,
ask them to come on the podcast.
Ask them to come on the podcast. Ask them to tell us about their ambitions, their artistic ambitions, and particularly tell them what it is about us that makes us so smelly and distasteful and
Well, we think we
have,
know. We think
have
we know.
voices they don't
I
want
think
to
we
hear.
know. It's the Jewish word. By the way, I want to say one more thing. This is before they never asked for the script, so they don't know what's in the script. So what doesn't fit their remit of their programming names? Jewish voices on the stage does not fit their that has to be what it is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what did they do? They had, and there's Mark O'Brien. Let's put it up there. Mark.
So Mark O'Brien, as I referred to in the letter, is the artistic director of the Abbey. So it's very important that we know exactly who this guy is. So this is him tweeting the same days, the same week that the
Weekend,
Bibas
yeah.
babies were returned, their mutilated bodies returned to their family.
Such a privilege. Hashtag #IrePalestine, which is the Palestinian ambassador to Ireland. Ireland has now recognised the Palestinian state, and they now have a Palestinian ambassador. So such a privilege. Irish Palestinian ambassador, Doctor Gillan Waba Abdal Majad is in with us at the Abbey Theater last night for the opening of Milk from the Abbey Theater. Such a privilege to have these wonderful people with us for the week making theatre with the team at the National Theatre. Don't miss their show. And there they are. And several people in the group photograph are wearing the keffiyeh and big smiles, because that's what you do the weekend that the Palestinian state, and by the way, Hamas controlled the Palestinian state. Hamas murdered these babies. So when your government and your state strangle babies to death, then you go and pose with the ambassador with a big smile and say it's such a privilege to have these wonderful people for the week.
And even in the context of, that they had arranged this in the past, that the whole thing had been, whatever was on some schedule, whatever, in the particular context of what had just happened, there's absolutely no reason for him to talk like that without mentioning the babies, without acknowledging the babies, which the whole world are brokenhearted over the babies and horrified, terrorized, by the way. Actually, that's what it is. It's the exact definition of terrorism is what they've done with those babies. People are terrorized. I kept all over the weekend, every time I saw a baby, I kept thinking, I looked at people who had their babies and I was thinking, are they holding those babies tighter than they normally do? I kept thinking, people have it, and I almost wanted to say things, but of course, living around here where we are, Philip, you wouldn't know what people would think, but just extraordinary. And we've been looking at those babies' faces like for a very long time, and we've seen video of them, and it's all over Twitter. Anyone who wants to see video of them, we'll put up some video there of the lovely babies playing. And as I said at the end of the podcast, I'm going to read the extraordinary piece from the Wall Street Journal. In other news,
we were at the ARC conference 2x2.
Yes, we were. And lots of extraordinary speakers, by the way. And there were extraordinary speakers, and then you'd be walking around in the conference centre and it was like, oh, there's Calvin Robinson. Oh, there's Eric Metaxas. Oh, there's Jordan Peterson. Like literally all these people were walking around, and it was kind of overwhelming in a lot of ways. But the conference was opened by Douglas Murray, and he was the first speaker. And honestly, I thought it'd be nice to give you a little taste of that. And a lot of the speakers, the video of their presentations are available online, and we'll put up a link to where you can find them. But Douglas talked about basically this kind of civilizational moment. What are we called on to do? And I think he was sort of saying that the theme of the conference was reconstruction, building back. And I'm going to just share this one part with you where he said, that part of the reconstruction also involves us looking back and realizing and reclaiming the wonderful civilization we have. And the conference, of course, happened. We were in the Docklands, which is pretty miserable and bleak. And at the beginning of his speech, he basically said, just for anyone who's a foreigner who's come to this conference to know, by the way, quite close to here, there's a beautiful city.
Yes, and we can testify to that. I mean, it is an amazingly beautiful city. It is.
But we were not there. But no. Let's listen to Douglas Murray explaining what he thinks we ought to do. Part of his speech.
The second thing I wanted to mention this morning that you need for civilizational renewal, and that's the ability to look back. To look back. We've wasted so much time in recent years. We've wasted so much time. People have made us move at such a retarded speed. We've had years of talking about the most basic things that our species knew, men and women, what are they? Come on. Who had time for this? Who has... And the problem is that there is a cost to this. There has been a civilizational cost to be made to go at the speed of the slowest kids in the class. Now, one response to the era of mass migration that I've written a great amount has been what I've described as the deculturation of our societies. The idea that in order to welcome people into our societies, we effectively have to pretend that we are uninteresting places, unimportant places until migration makes us interesting. And I just wanted to mention an analogy here, which my friend Eric Weinstein, who's come in today from LA, gave me this idea a while ago. He said, as a boy, he had the impression that ice cream was something whose base flavor was vanilla, and all other flavors were added on top of vanilla. And he said it was only at some point in his youth that he discovered that vanilla itself is a flavor, and a very complex flavor. Now, we in the West have created an extraordinarily complex and rich flavor, and we have spent recent years pretending that we have no flavor, or that flavor is something that only other people bring to us. And this is, of course, flat out wrong, but it's been something that we have told more than one generation of young people in the West. We've told them that we don't really have anything very great, or if we do, we oughtn't to talk about it too much. And I believe that that is flat out wrong, because what we have in cities like that, just a little way up the road, and in the cities of Europe and the West, are the greatest civilization that the world has known. And we have the choice. We have the choice either to live in the wastelands or to rebuild them. Now, there are cities in Europe, I think of cities like Budapest, I think of many German cities, where the idea is that you actually can restore beauty to the built environment, that people do not need to wander like lost souls around the wastelands of East London looking for meaning against buildings that tell them you are nothing, you do not matter. We have the opportunity to restore, not just in the built environment, but in the educational environment, to make sure that when we talk about our culture, we don't just talk about it, but we also do it. For people to realize that our culture is not just something they revere, but something that young people can add to understand the conversation, the poetry of mankind, to understand that just because Mozart is great does not mean you cannot build on Mozart, that just because the great buildings are great does not mean you cannot add to them. I would urge, in the age of reconstruction, that our great task is not just to break through with innovation, but to reclaim what is ours, to say that we love it, and that if people wish to join us in the veneration of this civilization, they are very, very willing to do so. If they don't wish to join us, there are other places they can be.
And I love how he finishes there, by the way. I love how he finishes there where he says, and there's places that they could be, basically saying, if you don't realize and recognize how extraordinary this civilization is here in Britain, as he was saying there, why don't you just go back to wherever it is you came from, if you think that that's better. But, so
there were some
good.
great speakers. There was speakers on demography, on energy. Robert Bryce, our friend, Chris Wright, also our friend, who's the energy secretary. So as those videos are released, we may come back to them and put them up on the show. So
demography. I just want to say one thing about the demography thing. The demography speaker, and I think it's such a big subject. I think we need to come back to it. But Amazing.
Amazing.
Amazing and really frightening. And there's absolutely, after listening to it, and we definitely need to bring you all the details about that, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this is the crisis that civilization is facing. Forget about climate change. Forget about all that. The real crisis is the fact that people aren't having babies, and it's a massive problem. And some countries, by the way, are being very imaginative about ways to cope with that. I think Hungary are now offering, if you have 2 babies, that you'll never pay tax again in your life, which I thought was pretty cool.
As he said, it's been a limited success. It's a big problem. I remember one of the speakers saying it's a limited success. That Hungarian initiative, it has stalled the decline, but it has not increased the numbers.
No.
So it's
everywhere.
One thing I remember from the speech he gave was, that there was a decline in the birth rate after, say, the financial crisis. And after every decline, it went from, let's say, 2.2 to 1.8 per couple. It never goes back up.
It never recovers.
It's always downwards.
It becomes a kind of a cultural thing then.
Yes. So we would like to have that guy back on. So we will talk to him. We'll get the video and introduce you to it. I want to talk about it was on when we were there, the Children in Gaza documentary. It's called Gaza. How to survive a war zone, and it's kind of was presented as this innocent child's view of hell coming to Gaza. 3 children were featured, and as I say, they were presented as a kind of naive children. Their view of their lives being upended by a war by Israel, and except that it has since emerged by some brilliant journalism that these were not just 3 random children picked up on the street.
Shocking.
The film's narrator was whose name was Abdullah al-Yazuri, was not just any random war-affected child, which we are told there are many. He is the son of Ayman al-Yazuri, a senior Hamas official in Gaza's government.
The BBC didn't mention that.
Or they didn't know, right? Now,
that's almost worse.
Yes, that's almost worse, right? But if they, actually, everyone's saying this should not have been broadcast because he's the son of a Hamas official. In my opinion, as a journalist, there's nothing wrong with broadcasting that.
Totally.
It's very interesting for people to see perhaps how brainwashed and indoctrinated children are. What's the culture there? How they're being used by their parents? Is there any opportunity for them to challenge their parents? Can they speak freely? But the BBC failed to mention who this child was.
Yes.
Right? So therefore, we were just led to believe, this is just
some random child that they
who
mentioned.
has these extremely well articulated anti-Israel opinions that just popped into his head. And some of the other children's stories just failed to pass the smell test of any reputable journalist. There was some dodgy non-sequential editing about incidents that happened on all the same day. There was one child who was featured, and she was a wonder child, really. And it turns out that there was a photograph of the child posing with a gun and in a Hamas uniform on another piece of social media. And the person really who's revealed all this is investigative journalist David Collier, and you can find him on Twitter at Mishtal, Mishtal. And he says scenes were heavily staged and edited with non-sequential cuts that bent the reality into a more sympathetic shape. Now, again, there's actually nothing wrong. We've all done it. You can make something non-sequential as long as it doesn't affect the story, the facts, or anything like that.
And as long as you stay being a journalist, I mean, the very idea that a 10-year-old is simultaneously a volunteer paramedic, a journalist's assistant, and an ambulance cleaner, all in the one day. Should seem a little bit ludicrous to any viewer. But
however,
by the way, should really create some curiosity, at least, on the part of the journalist who's supposed to be reporting on this.
Yes.
Surely this would be like multiple red flags. Like there's something up here, right?
But also there was as he says, telltale glaring continuity errors. That the volunteer paramedic, and apparently the one incident where he was helping people who were buried in a building, his shoes he changed 4 times in what was supposed to be a single chain of events. So kind of the brotherhood of the traveling shoes, and his hair length fluctuated between shots.
And I'm impressed with the 4 different pairs of shoes as well, because again we're being told that they're impoverished to a stage where basically people are starving to death.
So the BBC stitched together this to make it more sympathetic. Then the BBC issued a statement when this came out, and they said it was produced in line with BBC editorial guidelines, and the BBC had full editorial control. The film told the children's own stories, sharing sharing with viewers their direct experiences of living through a war. And the children's parents did not have any editorial input. The BBC insist they had full editorial control, and then they tried to shift later on. They tried to shift blame to the independent producers, but that phrase caught my eye. No parental input. So, was there any parental permission? Like, it's unethical to interview a 14-year-old without parental input, without parental supervision.
Yeah, without a release form, release form that's signed by the guardian or by the parent.
Without parental permission. But it's unbelievably unethical to film a child in a war zone. Especially, by the way, as we're told, Israel is a nation of child-murdering genociders, right? So there he is criticizing Israel. You'd be putting that child in danger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for that, you must have parental supervision and you must have parental permission. But you also, the parent needs to be there to make sure the child doesn't say anything that the Israeli child murderers won't target them for. And of course, by the way, the thing they won't say is that the biggest danger to that child criticizing, telling the truth about Gaza is from Hamas, not from Israel.
Yes.
So you cannot make a documentary about a 14-year-old in such contentious situations and not have. In fact, you could almost say you cannot make a documentary, because if the child says something critical of Hamas, if you publish it, and this is a point, it goes to a larger point, by working in Gaza and dictatorships, there are no independent journalists. And I say that not as a criticism. There can't be independent journalism, because if something, like for example in Gaza, if something critical of Hamas is published or broadcast, the local journalists, the stringers who made it happen, are in danger. Their families are in danger. They or their families will be murdered or face really terrible consequences. Every piece of information that comes out from local stringers should carry a health warning. It's important to have the local stringers because you can get footage and you can independently analyze it. They should say, we should let you know this report was compiled under Hamas restrictions that mostly suppress hostile stories or stories that reflect badly on their organization. But the BBC didn't do that. They pretend that all the stuff that comes out from Gaza is just like what you see, from Huddersfield, or London. There's no fatal consequences for reporting from London yet. So it's different. We need to be told it's different. And the BBC is part of a cover-up, part of a conspiracy to...
So the latest on that story is that the BBC have taken down the documentary after huge amounts of criticism online. Like, social media went nuts about this. And actually, Mr. Collier is the guy who's most responsible really for that happening, which, luckily they did it in the end. But this is what taxpayers in the UK have paid for, and this is, you can really see why people stop paying their license, their TV license, being forced basically to pay for Hamas propaganda. It's a pretty it's a big thing to ask people to do, and it's extremely unfair because they're hiding behind this kind of neutrality and this kind of, we're the BBC, And the idea, by the way, that they got fooled. I mean, there's no explanation actually of any kind that makes it better.
No. So look. This is willful fooling, right? If it's fooling at all, because they know that every piece of footage that comes out of Gaza is going to be run over with a fine-tooth comb by all the Israeli monitors that are out there.
Yeah.
All the independent journalists are out there. Why they didn't do a simple social media search for this kid or for the other kids.
But they did. They did, and they knew.
They knew.
They did, and they knew,
and they didn't care.
And they didn't care.
And they didn't expect.
Yeah, they didn't expect anyone to find out, or
they thought they could bluff through it. But anyway, you want to talk? We'll come back to this story. You want to talk, Anne, about the New York Times and Danger Talk.
Well, I wasn't going to say Danger Talk right away. I mean, I was going to talk about this New York Times story, which the headline itself is incredible, And this is kind of a big story in the New York Times. Botched care. You can change the word care there for botched abortions and tired staff. Planned Parenthood in crisis. The healthcare provider of last resort, the healthcare provider of last resort. This is the New York Times.
What the heck?
I don't know what that means.
What does that actually mean?
Of last resort. Is
Anyone
working,
in this room, can they explain
yes,
that?
yes, of last resort, is working to shore up affiliate clinics that are in dire financial straits. Patients report failed abortions, misplaced IUDs, and inadequately trained staff. This is a very long article. I would highly recommend people to read the whole thing.
Linked in the show notes.
But it's a catalogue of unbelievable mistakes that have happened. And
for example,
employees at various affiliates said it was common to run out of over-the-counter pain medications and IV flushes. Employees said there had been constant pressure to more than double the number of patients seen to help bring in more revenue, more money, right?
Well, can I just say, and I'm going to mention this later on, what about informed consent? If you're under pressure to grind through patients,
Mm-hmm.
then the person doesn't get to hear of all the risks and all the...
Well, that's one of the things actually that they talk about, because they're actually spending much less time with people than they used to do. So very good point.
Yes.
And in one case that was settled in California last year, a woman accused the organisation of improperly implanting a birth control device, the IUD, in her arm and causing nerve damage. In another case in Nebraska, a clinician in 2022 did not realise that a woman was 4 months pregnant. Didn't realise the woman was 4 months pregnant.
If only there's a cheap and handy way of finding out if women were pregnant.
When she inserted,
say like, if only pharmacies,
like a pregnancy test.
If only pharmacies sold that for a relatively small amount of money.
If only, Philip. So in this Nebraska case, a woman was 4 months pregnant and Planned Parenthood didn't notice, and they inserted an IUD, and several hours later the patient was rushed to an emergency room and gave birth to a stillborn fetus.
I think it's a stillborn child, actually.
Yes. Many clinics, I'm just reading the actual, what they've written in the New York Times here. Many clinics are in dire need of upgrades and repairs. In Omaha last year, sewage from a backed up toilet seeped into the abortion's recovery room for 2 days. According to interviews with staff, people were throwing up. And there's a photograph.
Yes.
The informed consent
yes,
one there.
So this caught my eye. But clinic members, so they were being urged to see more than 4 patients an hour, and for appointments to last about 10 minutes. An email went out from Planned Parenthood to Greater New York. But clinic staff members said that they need more than 10 to 15 minutes to provide compassionate care. Many patients have literacy and language barriers, or wrestle with social ills like housing insecurity, abuse, and poverty. That made me think, what about informed consent?
Yes, yes.
If the person doesn't speak English, if the person is not literate,
yes,
if the person is going through drug addiction or homelessness, there's a lot going on there, and you might need more than 10 to 15 minutes before they work out all the consequences, the future consequences of this life-changing decision, literally life-changing decision.
Yeah. And then you go on, it's such an incredible testimony here, actually. They went on to say that it's not uncommon for patients to be taken to the wrong room and prepped for the wrong procedure. Isn't that lovely, Philip? We would catch it when a patient would say, why am I in a room with ultrasound machines and a sedation nurse for a pap smear? Wrong room, wrong patient, Mrs. Larson said. Clinic workers complained that they were learning from inexperienced peers.
Sounds like Gosnell's clinic.
I know, no, this is exactly what I thought. More than a dozen said they did not receive adequate training for patient intake, blood draws or other tasks. For months last year at the North Central State affiliate, which oversees the Nebraska clinic, an understaffed nursing department did not upload sexually transmitted infection test results into the charts, and patients wrongly believed that their results were negative when they did not hear back. And botched abortions. A woman had gotten an abortion at a Planned Parenthood clinic in Albany, New York, and moved with her 2 daughters into a homeless shelter, but something was very wrong. Several weeks after the procedure, this is an extraordinary story, by the way. Several weeks after the procedure, she was still bleeding heavily and suffering from painful cramps. She took another home pregnancy test, and when it came back positive, the clinic staff assured her that they had seen the aborted fetus and that there was nothing to worry about. It was only after she went to the emergency room that she discovered the problem. The baby was still in her womb 12 weeks after the failed abortion. Miss Alston went into labour and delivered a baby who quickly died.
Yeah.
I could go on and on and on about.
This is so Gosnell, though.
It's so
we
Gosnell,
need
yeah.
to explain to people who maybe don't know our what we've done in the past. We did the movie about Kermit Gosnell, the book about Kermit Gosnell,
And
the
the
podcast,
podcast.
and the play about Kermit Gosnell,
And the art exhibition,
and the art exhibition.
photographic
So we're
exhibition.
kind of experts on Kermit Gosnell, America's biggest serial killer. The book, it's all there in the book, Gosnell, The Untold Story of America's Biggest Serial Killer, available from Amazon and wherever you get your books
Or in a library.
in a library. So, being taught by inexperienced peers, being, botched abortions.
Why am I in this room?
Yes,
Where's the equipment?
Sexually he rose it. He was slightly better, worser than that. I'm using that word. He would give people sexually transmitted diseases by reusing single-use instruments.
Correct.
So he's a real charmer. So this is nothing. This is nothing new to us. It's new to the New York Times, and it struck you as well. Actually, funny. Elizabeth was just saying to me earlier, where are the New York Times data journalists? Do you remember the data? They're the crack data team. They've got 400 data journalists where they take numbers and crunch them.
Yeah. They were great during COVID,
Yes,
right?
and they were great during elections and all that. But so why don't you crunch the data and see if this is unusual for a medical
Organization.
place? Yes, to have this high rate of accidents and then you might find out that it's a little bit more than accidents. It's willful.
a pattern.
It's pattern. It's when you don't care about human life, you don't care about your patients either. When you care about money, and then patients, maybe it's normal. By the way, see, the great thing is it could be actually statistically okay, right?
Well, I think one of the things that comes up in the article is that, because no one in America is immune to the information that huge amounts of money are donated to Planned Parenthood, both from the government, by the way, and from private individuals.
Yes.
But what's very interesting from the article is that huge amounts of that money goes into politics rather than going into the care, the abortion care that they care so much about, But the piece I love of this that I really love is at the end of the article, and it's kind of the most interesting part of all. And of course, as Phelim used to, when he was training me as a journalist, it was like, what's the story? What's the story? You'd always want, what's the story? And the story, whatever the story is, should be up at the top of the story, not at the bottom. Unless you want to bury the story, which is a particular trick that organizations like the New York Times do all the time.
Good.
So here's the last couple of paragraphs. Dozens of current and former employees also said that their complaints were met with reminders that they were in a mission moment,
Quotation
meaning
marks.
a time of crisis for reproductive rights, so urgent that it overshadowed their concerns. Whatever about a woman who's,
Some people must die for the revolution. And
Exactly. Some have worried that criticizing practices in the clinics could empower the anti-abortion movement at a time when the organisation faces more challenges than ever before.
Look,
many remain quiet. We're afraid of damaging the mission.
Is that why you sold baby parts? What mission was that part of? Did we mention that?
Yeah, funny. They never mentioned that revenue, by the way, which I have to say that David Daleiden did a lot to destroy. So well done, you, David.
So that's another part of the problems with Planned Parenthood is they've lost this revenue source from selling baby parts, and it was significant. It was thousands of dollars per abortion.
So I compliment the New York Times actually for doing this story at all, but what I think is really interesting is that they've kind of missed out on the big point, which is the fact that people who work for Planned Parenthood in these abortion mills are encouraged, more than encouraged, to never complain and to never actually report anything that they see that is horrific. And they don't. And it's interesting because it reminded me, we covered this in a recent podcast. I made this discovery that a scientific paper dealing with this very phenomenon already was published back in 2016 and written, by a bunch of very impressive-looking scientists and doctors
and researchers
from Michigan, and they called it like they found a name, a phrase, and you can find it now in scientific literature. It's called danger talk. It specifically describes negative talk between abortion workers about what they've seen on the job. And they call it danger talk for the very reason that they're worried that it might affect business. basically.
If it gets out.
If it gets out.
So
because it would be,
don't say it. It's
whatever you do,
dangerous
don't
to
say
say it.
anything, because the worst thing you want is for the pro-life movement to get their hands on this information and to publish it. So, but I just thought that the New York Times are missing out on the point. The real point of the story is they're reporting on unbelievable malpractice at medical facilities, dealing with, quite often, according to themselves, the most vulnerable people in our population. And according to their story, and of course we know it's true, the people running that very institution makes it very clear to the workers that they are to shut their mouths and not say what they've seen, not report what they've seen. And guess who suffers most in that? The very people that they say they're there to protect.
Yes.
So, and I wanted to just, this danger talk, I'm fascinated by it. And I'm not finished, and we're going to do more work on this. But just to give you an idea, so this abstract from this research paper back in 2016 by these bunch of researchers up in Michigan, they've described the difficulties of doing abortion work, including the psychosocial costs to individual providers. Some have discussed the self-censorship, and this is more than self-censorship, by the way, in which providers engage to protect themselves and the pro-choice movement.
Well, yeah, when you're told that you're in a mission-critical environment, it's not self-censorship, it's your boss censoring you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And you're basically, and I mean, there's so many stories, but basically the stories, particularly like those stories, the very stories, by the way, that were reported there in New York Times are the exact kind of stories that they are told very clearly from management. Do not report on this because you're on a mission here. And the mission is to kill as many babies as possible. And we can't do anything at all that might interfere with that. Because that's what the mission is. And you can't be giving fodder to the pro-lifers and the pro-babies, which I actually like. That was John Waters had that phrase. Not pro-life, pro-babies.
Yes,
that's really good.
Yeah. So I almost want to, it almost feels a little grubby now talking about Irish America after the serious topics we've discussed today. But anyway, I just wanted to say that we're now coming up to St. Patrick's Day, Ireland's national day. And every St. Patrick's Day, the great and the good, and I use that with inverted commas around it, of Ireland, go to the White House.
And can I just say something before we just get right into that? For those people who don't know, all of my life, I've hated St. Patrick's Day. The only time I've ever enjoyed St. Patrick's Day is if you're not in Ireland. So the big impetus, if you have any, wherewithal, is to get out of Ireland and celebrate St. Patrick's Day somewhere else, because everywhere else they do it better than in Ireland.
Yes.
Now, they've improved a bit of late. However, going somewhere else is the ticket, right, Philip?
Yes. And so the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition, all the leaders of the political party, the great and the good, they have an annual party / reception at the White House. It's a major event, and it's unique. No other country gets this for their national day. It's a sign of just how important the Irish American community was for Irish politics and Irish funding, mostly Democrat funding. But of course, we say what I said was there,
yes,
because the world is changing, and again, it's that guy Trump, who's behind a lot of it. Now, Democrats have helped it along as well. There's a lot less people identifying as Irish American, fewer immigrants coming from Ireland. Thanks, by the way, to a immigration law change promoted by the Democrat Party back in the 60s. They favoured Latin American immigrants, and Irish Americans. They may have been Democrats, but they were always conservative Democrats. And in an election dominated by abortion and, quote, trans rights, that is the right to mutilate children and adults, it's no surprise that Irish Americans are now actually really mostly supporting, I think, the Republican Party, the white working class, as we hear so much about. For example, Sean Hannity, Joe Rogan, Bill O'Reilly, there's so many Irish Americans in the Republican chattering classes these days. And the only candidate actually in public life is a member of Trump's cabinet. And interestingly, none of them make a big thing out of them being Irish.
Yes,
you never
correct.
hear a word about it, really. But this seems to have gone unnoticed by Irish politicians. They think the people here still care about them. And they don't. And they're getting rapidly... That was something that I was speaking to some people at the ARC conference, and they were going, Ireland's in severe danger of becoming a real pariah nation because this anti-Semitism, the president is just appalling. The elected president, they've been at the forefront in getting Israel charged for war crimes. The leadership of Sinn Féin, which is the kind of opposition party, north and south, they are saying we're not going because of America's support of Israel. And it's like,
They weren't invited, by the way.
yes, they were not invited. Israel, it's like,
It's like you're. By the way, it's like being in school. It's like like you're 10 years old or something in school, and it's like I'm not going to your party. I'm not going to go to your party.
you
by the
weren't
way,
invited?
yeah, you weren't invited. But it's like get your retaliation in quick.
It's like Fulham's away strategy, equalize before the other team scores. Yes. Anyway, so Simon Harris, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, called President Trump an awful gal. Now, a gal is an Irish word for a female genitalia. So normally that would be enough to get you cancelled, but when you're a progressive Irish politician, the rules don't apply. Americans don't care, but two things Trump cares about: Israel and support of Israel. And if you are anti-Israel and you're anti-Semitic, basically, we talked earlier about the National Theater. No politician has said anything or done anything, but also he cares about American jobs and American investment.
And he's been talking a lot recently about the External Revenue Service, the external as opposed to internal revenue
Yes.
service. And a lot of companies, because of the very attractive tax rate in Ireland, relocated their headquarters and employed a ton of people. And the Irish economy now is extremely vulnerable to the fact that the GDP of Ireland is based, a huge percentage, like 25%, is based on these receipts from these
Six companies.
tiny number of companies.
Six companies. And as we've seen, Trump is very good at applying pressure to things like Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, and all. He's he's good ABC. He's good Disney.
It's a very bad time for St. Patrick's Day to be coming around, by the way.
Six companies could just decide, you know what, we'll pull our, and it's a rounding error for them, a few billion here, a few billion there. The Irish economy is incredibly dependent on these 6 or 7 companies. Yeah. And, we were lucky enough to spend quality time with President Trump during his last term. And I remember thinking, oh, well, I need to learn about Ireland and his Irish business interests. We spent an hour with the man. He never once mentioned we were Irish. He didn't care we were Irish. He cared about the media. He cared about Melania. He cared about Iranian foreign policy. He cared about where Bill and Monica had their tryst. He
cared about the play that we had written called FBI Lovebirds, which we showed a clip from last week.
Yes.
Yep.
But that was 2 weeks before the St. Patrick's Day party. He didn't mention the St. Patrick's Day party. Yeah. It's not important to him and his administration. But Ireland is important now because of their anti-Semitism and because of their taking American jobs and money from America. So I'm just saying to the Irish people, Irish politicians, you're worried about not getting an invite. You might have bigger worries coming ahead.
Yes. Watch out.
Watch out.
Exactly. So we've come kind of to the end of the show, but I said I would read this piece from Bernard Henry Levy from the Wall Street Journal, and I'm going to read the whole thing. I just thought it was extraordinary, and it's a little challenging to read. I'm going to put up a picture there that shows the picture that they have in the Wall Street Journal. Ponder how the Bibas boys died is the headline. Imagine the life of a baby trapped in dark, damp tunnels, of a toddler ripped from his family. By Bernard Henry Levy. I have spent my life witnessing and reporting on the most atrocious crimes from Bosnia to Somalia, Syria to Algeria, and now Ukraine. After October 7th, after seeing the burned kibbutzim and gathering the testimonials of survivors, I was often asked if I had ever experienced anything similar. When I think of Kiffer and Ariel Bibas and their mother, Shiri, I now answer, no, I am not sure I have ever encountered such horror. Consider these phrases: child hostage and baby hostage. In other wars, the death of a child is the ultimate shame, and some remnant of humanity or rationality generally prevents captors from bothering with an infant. They abandon the baby. They leave it behind or on the roadside. Someone less hardened might even leave it wrapped in a blanket outside a church, a mosque, or a home. Here, they deliberately took the time to abduct these 2 terrified little beings clinging to their mother. What went through these men's minds as they dragged them away like animals? Did they understand the Jewish devotion to children? Had they seen during their surveillance how Jewish children are cherished? How beautiful little boys with their long hair cut the day they are given honey-covered letters to make them love Hebrew? Did they foresee the images of Kiffer, 9 months, and Ariel, 4, covering the walls of our cities? Did they revel in advance at the outpouring of Jewish emotion that this insult to the world's innocence would unleash? I don't know. One must imagine the life of Kifar and Ariel as hostages. If, as is probable, they were torn from their mother's arms, imagine the life of a baby who spends most of his time in dark, damp tunnels. Imagine the life of a toddler ripped from his family without understanding. Picture them playing, because children always play. Did they have stuffed animals or spent shell casings, Legos or guns to lick instead of honey-coated letters? Were they hungry, thirsty? Did they scrape mud with their tiny nails or drink contaminated water? Did the captors change Keffiyeh's diapers, or did they let him sit in his own filth until his skin burned? Did they have talcum powder, medicine for fevers? What did the masked jailers do when the boys cried, were scared of night noises, or asked the stars about their fate when they were briefly allowed outside? Did they hit them, strike them with rifle butts? Did they amuse themselves by firing their Kalashnikovs into the air to frighten them further? Did Ariel become the guardian of his baby brother? Did they live out their brief lives together or separately? When Keffiyeh spoke his first words, did they mock him, silence him, or pour the captor's language into their mouth to erase his mother's? I don't know. One day they died. Whether on the same day or not, the family, the hostages, and Missing Families Forum, or the government may tell us, but they died. After interminable weeks of waiting, suffering, and the profanation of their purity and sanctity as children, they ended their lives alone. As unbearable as it is, we must imagine that moment. Because the ultimate indecency, the most indecent form of comfort, would be to close our eyes and refuse to see. How and when did they die? During a tunnel collapse, or a deluge of fire and iron early in the war, as claimed by their captors, who used the boys as shields? Or did the men in black, weary of their tears and noise, their games in the tunnel, or perhaps simply because they thought they were spoiled little Jewish children, strike them to quieten them, torture them to death, execute them? The identification process just confirmed the latter. Regardless, Hamas did this. Whatever the Israeli military doctors discover, Hamas erased the world's most beautiful baby and a schoolboy whose life gave the earth its purpose, as all children's lives do. Once children were gassed as they descended from the trains, Hamas waited. Damn those who try to drag us into the false game of moral equivalency. These two breaths cut short. This double death of innocence is Hamas's abomination alone, and it is unforgivable.
So we will see you next week. The Anna Film Scoop. Also,
Put this in
as I
Cameroon.
say, let us know your comments. We read them all, and we're going to read them out. But follow us on X, on Unreported Story Society, Philip McAleer and McElhinney, on Facebook and on Instagram. We read it all, we monitor it all, and links to the show, links to our where you can find us are in the show description and the notes. So please leave your comments on YouTube. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.